All right, welcome back for another episode of Talk to Tatiana. And today we have Randy Z. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name just yet, but you will enlighten us on how it's pronounced. And Randy, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Tatiana.
Awesome. So, how do you pronounce your last name? I should have asked you before I hit record,
Oh
but I
no, that's
didn't.
okay. It gets pronounced a lot of different ways, but it's really just Ziegenfuss. It's a nice German name.
Yep, that's what I thought. Okay, good, because I did study German in high school for a little bit. Don't remember any of it anymore.
Excellent.
All right, Randy. So I know that we are doing the business coaching and advisory and kind of support of your entrepreneurial journey. But before we get to that, please share with me and the audience kind of where you've started your career and go in as much detail as you'd like. I personally like the detail, and this episode is airing on April Fool's Day, so I think if you're pretty great with inserting humor into it, so feel free to do that.
So this is all an April Fool's joke, but no, it's really not. So let me give you a little bit of background on my sort of career trajectory. So as a student, probably around middle school, junior high, I guess that's what it was back in the dark ages in the 70s and 80s. And in high school, I was obviously, once you hear about my career, somebody who was interested in the arts. So I was a trumpet player, and I was all about taking the music stuff and being in the band and whatnot. And so when I got to high school, I decided that was going to be the fit for me. So I was going to become a music teacher. I was inspired by the teachers that I had, and had been studying trumpet locally at a college, and decided I would go to that particular college and get my music degree and become a band director. But it didn't quite work out that way. I had a really bad student teaching, they call it, practice teaching experience at the high school level in band. And I was just like, I don't ever want to do this because I'll probably go deaf. So I ended up taking a job at a middle school teaching choral music and musical theater and general music. And I loved it. So I continued to play a little bit then, but I really got interested in like conducting and the sort of organizational aspects of taking kids on trips and things like that. I lived just a little bit, 90 minutes outside of New York City. So, like, going into the city with kids on field trips and things like that was always like a really great experience. So, I did that for 12 years. And during that time, like the last 5 years of that time period, is when technology started to become infused in education. So that was like probably mid 90s maybe. And somehow there were these computers that landed in my classroom, and I was just like, oh, interesting, what could I do with these? So I learned how to like do MIDI and like create music, and it really transformed my classroom. It was like a three-ring circus. It was like kids were creating music, kids were playing music, they were working in groups and just being really creative. And that helped me realize like kids can really love learning. It's just a matter of whether we create learning environments that actually fit with the way they learn and what they want to learn. And then after I got pretty good at the tech stuff, I moved out of the music classroom after 12 years. And then I became an instructional technology specialist, which basically, in layman's terms, meant I was working with teachers to learn how to use technology. They were getting technology in their classrooms as well. And it was about, how do we use this stuff? How do we help kids to use it to learn better? I did that for 7 years, and then I went back to college and got a master's degree in um, technology leadership, of all things. So that was probably like the early 2000s. And then I left that district after 19 years. Um, and I was still doing some music and some theater. But then that sort of slowed down because I got into administration. So I moved to a neighboring district I was the technology director for 7 years, and then became an assistant superintendent, and then was the superintendent for about 7 years. And then I finished my career. I retired after 34 years, and I retired in January of 2021. So
Oh,
it's been
wow.
about a year. And that brings me to sort of the new phase of my life. So over that period of time, um, particularly in leadership positions, had done some work in terms of really changing up and transforming how we do school and how we think about school and education. And a lot of that really stems back to being in the music classroom and being in this sort of non-tested, special kind of area where kids, seem to really resonate with the learning experiences in a different way than they did in maybe their core subjects. And so as a leader, I would say my mission, my vision was, how do we transform the education system so that those kinds of experiences and that feeling that learners had could happen throughout all of their learning experiences, and not just in like the fun stuff like art or music. And so after I retired, I reflected, because it was actually during the dark days of COVID when everything was shut down and nobody was seeing each other. And I was sort of, after going 500 miles an hour as a superintendent, now going zero and trying to figure out how I was going to fill the time and space, was like, let's reflect on like, what did I actually do? And how can I make some sense out of that? And is there any value there in fueling the next phase of life and what I had to contribute? So I did have the opportunity to sort of engage with a couple other people and some of the ideas, and came up with this idea that launched earlier this week, called TheHuman.School. And it's at TheHuman.School. And it is basically an idea based on the reflections upon my career and what I did, and what I think that I worked with other people to accomplish during that period of time. So the idea of TheHuman.School is that we all have, we are all, as human beings, we are all born with gifts. And the purpose of education is to create the space and the opportunities for people to discover what those gifts are and to release them to the benefit of the world and themselves. And through my reflection, came to the conclusion that a lot of the people that are in the education space actually feel trapped and disempowered. The values that they hold, the reason why they got into the profession, are not in alignment with the way that the system is currently set up, which was set up like 200 years ago based on the social systems that existed at the time, primarily the industrial model. And so through my reflection, I created a framework, which I call the Human-School Compass, which is sort of the how to transforming schools to align more with the values that we have in our hearts as educators. And the Human-School Compass consists of 4 compass points. They are: be an objector, be an inventor, be a curator, and be a storyteller. And through further reflection, I realized that for change to come about in education, we have to change the way that we think and how we act in each of those compass points. And so each of the compass points has several what I call mind shifts, ways that we need to think differently in order to transform the system. So not only do we need to become objectors, and this is an example, but we need to shift our minds from thinking about being compliant subjects in the system, which is the way most educators think about their role now,
Mhm.
to being actively curious about what are the parts of the system that don't resonate with us that we would like to change. And that's where you start to, once you have that mind shift, that's when you start to take on the role of an objector. And you find
I
things
love that.
within the system that you want to change, that don't vibe with you, that don't resonate. But you have to become aware of that. And a lot of educators, because we have become so good at being compliant, aren't really good at being curious. And if we want to transform the system, we need to be curious about what are those things that don't resonate with us anymore. And
Hmm.
so the Human School Compass takes you through this cycle of becoming aware of what doesn't resonate with you, and then inventing solutions, and then testing out those solutions and gathering some evidence, some human centered evidence, because the Human School is all about transforming the system to be more human, to um, be designed to draw out those uniquely human things about each of the people that work and live in the system, which the standardized system just doesn't do now. It crushes us. It makes us feel trapped. So designing this framework and this idea, now sort of let me give you a sense of the vision for this, of like where I see it going. So created this framework, pushed it out into the world, and really what I want to do over at least the next year is, this is version 1.0. This is me basically thinking for a year and bouncing the ideas off of some close colleagues, and then creating some videos and some podcasts and some other content. And what I want to do over the next year is iterate this by having conversations with folks that are interested in this change, and elevating the framework, the ideas, to version 2.0. And then really start to see how this can gain some traction with practitioners, educators on the ground, teachers, and leaders who are actually in schools, because I believe that's where the change is actually going to happen. It's not going to happen in the traditional way that we think about policy and education and change. It's not going to happen from the state. It's not even going to happen from the district central office. It's going to happen on the ground with teachers and leaders. And this framework is designed to support them in aligning a system to their core values. And so I'm curious. I'm more the guy of ideas, and I'm curious to see how this might develop over the next year in terms of a side business or something like that. So I don't know. Does that give you enough background, Tatiana?
Absolutely. While you were talking, I actually peeked at your website, and see that you have some really cool stuff going on. The mind shift cards are really cool. I might actually get some for myself.
I have
Talk a
them
little
right
bit
here,
about,
actually.
huh?
Woo! Look at them. They're beautiful.
Awesome. So talk a little bit about, and I know I've actually taken some notes, and I think that I usually, when I interview someone on a podcast, I usually come up with the title for the episode as we talk, or as the person talks and we have a conversation. And so I've already come up with the title for this podcast. Um, do you want to hear
Yes,
it?
definitely.
Educators are good at being compliant and not so good at being curious. How about that?
Sounds good. It's true.
Yeah, and I think that it's true as well. And I certainly have experience with on the receiving side of the education with my kids. And I grew up, obviously, but I grew up in a different country, so I have a different experience on the receiving side of education as well. So it's very interesting for me to see where you are going to take it. And I like your framework, um, and your cards and your idea. What I'm curious about is, who is this for? For example, who would benefit from, let's say, the cards that you sell, or who would benefit from your podcast? Who's the target audience that you think will buy your offer?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And from what I've thought about so far, I'm looking at practitioners, people who are in the field that have a practice, and that would be teachers and leaders as well. And by leaders, I mean like principals that are in buildings and even central office people. I mean, education is really somewhat hierarchical, even though I don't particularly like that. Central office leaders do have a responsibility for shaping vision. And part of that vision can be transforming the system and making changes. Principals and teachers and even students. I mean, eventually I could see like, how do we build the leadership of students into bringing about this transformation? They're a huge part of the system. They're oftentimes a voice that's not heard. And in fact, one of my mind shifts is moving from thinking of leadership as a title to thinking of leadership as being in anyone. As long as you decide to take action that brings about change, you are a leader. And you can be a student, you can be a teacher, you can be a principal, you can be a superintendent. It doesn't matter what your title is. Leadership is based on what you do and whether you're bringing about change with what you do. So I think the audience, going back to your question, at least at this first swipe, is really teachers and leaders, but leaders like with a formal title, like central office people or principals.
That's cool. I took some notes as you were speaking. Thanks so much. I think it's really powerful, and I certainly, it's only been a year since you've retired, and honestly, it's very cool to see how much thought went into developing this idea. I really like it. I took some really cool notes that listeners and people who are watching will be able to see below the video if you're on YouTube, or in the show notes for the podcast. Great. So, how do you see yourself and your company, this company, supporting those teachers, leaders, and students with your offer? What would that relationship look like?
So I think initially, so this is where I don't have a great business sense. I'm I seem to be driven more by, and I like this, more by the mission of doing something good and something that contributes to the public good, so to speak, and contributes to the field of public education that I was in. And so really initially, as you see on the site, that the focus is really on the ideas. I'm not trying to monetize much of anything. And the only reason why the cards cost something is because they had to be printed. So the idea is the the desire at this point is really to get the ideas out there and to see what kind of traction they get. And I fully realize this is a pretty niche market, that there are a lot of frictions that people in the space will experience with these ideas. Some of those frictions being education is not a space that changes very easily. So there's a lot of inertia. Um, education is a system that's tightly intertwined with other systems. So there's a lot of energy that's required to change even a small part of the system. And right now, educators are feeling stressed and overburdened and whatnot. So I realize that that's a friction as well. So hopefully that gives you some idea of, where what I'm offering right now. I see as ideas, and want to get some more practitioner examples on there so that people see that there is something this can be brought to life. And if in the podcasts, so the podcasts are more like narrative podcasts, so they're relatively highly produced. So there's narrative that I wrote, but then there's also stories and sort of firsthand accounts from people in the space that are doing the work and represent a particular one of those compass points. So the podcasts are actually interesting from the perspective of seeing or listening, I should say, to real world examples of these ideas in play.
Okay. So let me reflect this back to you, and then maybe we can take it to the next level. So right now you have a framework and a number of ideas on how to really transform the education from within.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm curious about is I understand the cards, being a product that's being sold. I understand the podcast of being the place of ideas and information and um, helpful support to the educators that are in the trenches, so to speak. Uh, what is the next step? And would you be open to, say, running a something that's potentially beta, maybe probably unpaid, to get the feedback on what to do next, how to incorporate that? Because I believe in, and I've sort of um, has seen that to be true. I believe that um, if unless we formulate some sort of an offer, it really stays in the idea phase for a long time. And so, and at the same time, I also know, being a writer and an author and a speaker, that the creative process takes time. But I think that creating some sort of a structure where, okay, for the next 6 months, I want to test it out and I want to work with a very small group of beta people who will not pay anything, but they will get support um, from me and will provide feedback in return for that. What would you say to that?
So have thought about like coaching. That was one thing. And also how to turn this into, like, let's say somebody says, could you come to my school or could you come to my conference and do a 3 hour session or do a full day session? So I think down the line, the idea of structuring some professional learning, as we call it in education, might be called training, as in sort of the outside world. So I think there's some possibilities there. Um, Definitely want to do some speaking. I think the ideas are interesting to potential like conference goers or conferences. So would like to have that as something that feeds the ideas. So coaching, speaking, um, potentially like an online course, and definitely looking at a book has been on the radar as well as the year goes on, and as we start to iterate these ideas.
Awesome. Um, Terrific. And I just had one thought. Oh, I wanted to ask you something. So I have a client actually who who serves the unhappy, or I guess burnt out teachers as an audience. She has a course and a little membership where she helps teachers who are burnt out and don't want to stay in education get out of it, basically, and find another job. So, what I'm curious about is, she always talks about the fact that teachers and educators are really professionals with very limited means. And so my question is, and that there are a lot of, I guess, people out there trying to take advantage of them being burnt out, by offering them high ticket things and I guess courses, offers, whatever it is. So I'm curious to know, have you thought about that side of the your business plan and model at all, in terms of the offers to support them and kind of the, I guess, appeal to them for investing in your products that will come out in the future?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a friction point that has been there along the way, and that is that the biggest audience, teachers, don't really have the resources necessarily. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but initially putting the ideas out there, like just trying to build a community and not charging, um, that that decision was made largely because of the audience is not like, high paying business people.
Correct. Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer to that is going forward. But I think that probably anybody in the education space, particularly K-12, um, experiences that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's great that you've thought about it, because that's one of the things that it was surprising to me to understand. When we create courses and create programs, I think that, at least I hope that, okay, if the person sees a value, they'll be willing to pay for whatever it is that I'm selling. But then I think that with certain audiences, like teachers is one of them, it's a very thin line in terms of investing in yourself, but also not having physically having the funds to invest in something like that. Absolutely. And I think that also there are teachers who don't want to get out of the profession. A lot of them, obviously, because quite a few teachers are getting out of the profession, but teachers who really love what they do, I think they could greatly benefit from what you're offering, the support and the podcast and the ideas on how to make their classroom more fun and actually change the lives of kids, because that's what education is really about, and that's what teachers are really about, is
Mm-hmm.
changing the life of children, changing their future and affecting their future. That's awesome. And so I saw that you've formed an LLC. Tell me about that.
That was based on a recommendation. I don't. I need to learn a little bit more how to deal with that, and I just did it like in the last month or so. So I have the all the paperwork's done for that. I just need to. I'm not obviously bringing in much revenue at the moment, if any, and just through the sale of the cards. But other than that, I definitely need to learn more about how do I exist in that new world, which is definitely not the same as K-12, what I'm used to.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's not, and it's a slightly different world, but I think it's much more dynamic and fun than a traditional job with a salary and responsibilities and so on. You get to run your own life, and that's what's awesome about it. And so, I'll come back to the LLC question, or point rather. But what I was curious about is, okay, I actually forgot the left. Just lost my train of thought. I'll come back to that. I'll remember. But let me ask you then, on the LLC, or rather tell your coach or advise you on that. Just keep in mind that as soon as you hit $50,000 in, or some practitioners say 100,000, some practitioners say 50 in net income for the year, you should consider converting that LLC into potentially an S corp. I usually don't look at one entity as a go to, as most practitioners do. Oh, you should be an S corp. Oh, you should be on a single member LLC, or you should be sole proprietorship, or you should be a C corp. It's much more complicated than that. So as your business grows, there's a lot of considerations and potentially um, really signs for sometimes a 2 to 3 entity structures. And so that's not something you have to worry about right now. And I think that when you're just starting out and you're starting from scratch, an LLC is definitely the right choice. But as soon as let's say you're in June of 2022, you hit 50,000 or more in net profit from your business, that's when it's time to reach out to somebody and say, I'm at 50,000. I think it's time to convert me this LLC into an S corp. It's a really simple conversion if you know what you're doing. Nothing changes, no bank account change, no tax ID change, nothing. It's a mere tax conversion, and that's the really great power of it. So just wanted to throw that at you to give you an idea for that.
Excellent. I'll keep that on my radar as I learn more, progress, and grow in this.
Terrific, terrific. And business ownership in general, you have to treat it as a business. That's where accountants usually fail. And I certainly was a part of part of that a group of people for a long period of time. I think I still am sort of dipping into it, and I'll kind of give you an example. Hopefully, it will help you understand what how you treat this business that you've created and that you are going to grow. So for most accountants, love what they do. They love crunching numbers and doing tax returns and things like that. Most also good accountants aren't really great people. The reason being that like almost the perfect personality for accountants is an introvert who's sitting in their office not wanting to talk to other people, and so and that's certainly someone I've been. But in 2018, an award basically pushed me to change to mind shift, as you call it, and it was really transformational. And I remember talking to a client of mine, and he said, and I said, I didn't treat my business as a business just until recently, and he was very surprised. It's like, you are the business specialist. You are the person who advises other people on business. And so it was really a huge mind shift for me. And since then, I've been back and forth in terms of what it means to have a business.
Hmm.
To have a business means that you have to have a unique offer, you have to have demand for that offer, and you have to have systems. And where those three kind of intersect, and this is something that comes from Mike Michalowicz's book, The Pumpkin Plan, the sweet spot. If you have demand and unique offer, but no systems, you will sell time for money. And I remember my point now, and I'll it actually leading into it. If you have systems and demand, but not unique offer, it will be downward price pressure all the time. And so that the combination of the three is really important for a business. And with accounting business is it's a slightly different scenario. And I've realized that it's really hard to have systems and provide concierge top quality to clients. So something for you to think about. But the reason I'm mentioning all of this is, and where I would like you to elaborate a little bit on, is your non-negotiables. Get clear on those early, and you can even talk a little bit about them now if you'd like, and I'll give you an example. And it will be different for you because, first of all, you're a guy, and also you don't have small children, right? I'm assuming.
No small children. No
Good.
children.
Okay. So it will be different for everyone. And for me, this was the biggest thing because as my business was growing, I was accepting new clients, and everyone who came through the door, referral, I was trying to make it work for them, regardless of how much they paid. And so, and which is not a bad thing, but at the same time, what happened was usually summers are not busy for accountants. We do still have some work, but usually what I would do is I would be able to manage some of the bookkeeping work in the evening if I needed to. But during the day, like, we didn't send kids to like a day camp or anything like that for while they were very little. And we would just really explore and do like day trips and stuff like that. And then one of the summers, a client would call and say, when can you meet? And I would look at my calendar and it's free and it's like open. And I'd be like, oh, okay, whatever works for you. So I ended up having weeks where every day I had a call somewhere in the middle of the day. So I couldn't take kids on a day trip. I couldn't really connect with them the way I wanted. And that summer, I felt like I didn't get the connection that we normally get over that period with kids. And so for me, that was number one non-negotiable, where no work on weekends, no work in the evenings, and summers work 2 days a week on certain days of the week. That's it. And so what I'm curious to know is, what would those non-negotiables look like for you?
That's interesting because I haven't honestly thought about that, and I think that I've been so in the ideas that I haven't thought about what those non-negotiables are. So I suppose that that's something to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Well, you can always let me know if you'd like later when we meet. So, to reflect what you've mentioned back to you, right now, you're at the sharing the idea stage, the podcast, the speaking, the workshops, the trainings. Did I get it kind of right? Awesome. And I think that's a great start. And now, hopefully, I will help you a little bit in terms of the business side of things. And so, do you have any specific questions for me, or can I offer you a couple of ideas?
So just thinking about the non-negotiable question, I think one of the things that I don't want to do is to get back to the crazy schedule I had previously, where it was like being a superintendent, it's a 24/7 job. Like literally you'd get calls in the middle of the night to go manage a situation, something that happened that had to be addressed. And I think that um, I don't necessarily want to work full time, and maybe it's not even worth framing it as full time or part time. I want to do work that resonates with me. And if it means that there's a week of 60 hours and it resonates, that's cool. And if it means that there's a week of 0 hours and that resonates because I'm off doing something else, that's cool too. I have that flexibility. And so I think probably one of the non-negotiables is I want to do work that is a fit. And if it's not a fit, I don't want to do it. And
That's
I
terrific.
have the luxury at this point to sort of draw that line. Um,
I
and
love
I
it.
think in terms of questions for you, that definitely the business side, being in public education, it's not run like a business because I can't raise money. I basically have a limited fixed amount of money that comes from state government and comes from local taxes. So basically, the business side of things is how do I make decisions around allocating those funds? So I wouldn't say that my business savvy is exactly a 10 of 10. And so my question to you is, what could I do in the near, mid, or long term futures that would help me elevate my sort of business savvy score?
I think the you're sort of already there just based on what I hear and see from you, but not there in a sense that I think you're a little bit ahead than most people when they just start a business. You're thinking about it. You're thinking about the um, business side of things, right? And so I have a framework of the whole brain approach where I talk about the fact that businesses do start with the right part of the brain, the creative side, but then they absolutely need the support of the left side of the brain where you have to know enough to be dangerous sort of in numbers and money and taxes, how to manage all of that. Because I've worked with small businesses for, I think it's going to be like 18 years this year, maybe 17. 17, I think it will be. I'm adding years every time I talk to somebody. And so there's definitely understanding that you can't fake it till you make it when it comes to the money, numbers, and taxes side. I think you're already there because that's what a lot of people struggle with. Oh, I'm just starting out. I'm not making any money. I shouldn't be reporting taxes, or I shouldn't worry about managing the business. Or I am investing on all these programs. All of those decisions have to be supported by numbers. And so, similarly, I believe that you have to analyze launch, analyze. And even if it's a mini launch, like you're getting a group of 5 educators together to meet maybe 12 times over the next 3 months. And your offer to them is, I will support you in creating the change within your classroom. Um, and in return, you will provide feedback and it will be a work in progress. Um, and setting specific deadlines on that, not deadlines that are firm, because what I've learned in my own business journey is that sometimes you have to prioritize something else. And for me, let's say now in this time of year, it's my clients that have to get their taxes done. So similarly, sometimes you have the plan set out, but then let's say less people sign up that you've wanted. So maybe you'll push it back a little bit to allow yourself to get the people that you want in the group, and really come to that from a numbers perspective. Okay, so I need at least 16, or I'm making stuff up. I need at least 16 people to get the feedback I need so that I can launch it for profit next time. And so that's how you will learn to become a business owner. And remember, the goal of the business is to make money for you as a business owner, right? So you always have to run that analysis of not cost benefits. Sometimes you have to get out of the spreadsheet as well and be the visionary. But I think that just kind of moving from understanding that this part of the business is important, the money, numbers, and tax part, and move into the next stage where you actually make that happen. So you pay attention to your numbers, you look at your reports, you have bookkeeping that's set up, because bookkeeping is really the cornerstone, the foundation of every business. Well done bookkeeping will provide you information to build your business up and to later scale it. And so that's kind of how you can get to 10.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the feedback and the insights, Tatiana.
Absolutely. Randy, as we kind of wrap up here, I would always like to ask my guests this one question. If you could talk to your younger self, what would you say to that person, to that boy?
Um, just keep doing good work in the moment, and the rest will come.
Awesome. I love that. All right. And Randy, we'll post your connection links in the show notes or below this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Thanks so much for being a great guest and sharing your business and your insights and your dreams. That's really awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tatiana. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week for another episode of Talk to Tatiana.